Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, we'll hear the most magical story we've heard in a while when we talk with Dave Rothstein, who has been paddling down the Connecticut River inside an actual pumpkin.
A real live pumpkin, y'all. We'll also hear from NEPM's Karen Brown about how changes in gambling have been affecting us here in the Commonwealth.
Plus, we'll head up to Williamstown to find out about the films hitting the screen for the Indigenous Film Festival this weekend with Image's Cinema Executive Director Dan Hudson.
And right now, as with many of us, Congressman Jim McGovern is concerned about the West Bank, and he's also concerned with battling hunger.
How's the march coming?
It's coming well. I think people are still signing up and people are interested. We've been doing a lot of talking about it here on the show and getting different movers and shakers in the anti-hunger movement on the air to talk about how they're experiencing hunger in their communities and stuff. So, yeah, that's good.
Well, and we're making some calls, too. So we're still trying to shake the trees. I'm working with the food bank to make sure that some of these people are still giving. So hopefully we'll reach whatever financial goal you have.
Yeah, hopefully. It's interesting because being on a non-commercial station, we have limits about what we can actually say and how we can promote it, which I think you have to abide by too, right? Being an elected official.
Maybe I do, but I forget.
Time for our weekly chat with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts and the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Worcester's own Congressman Jim McGovern. A lot of questions this week in response to what's been going on between Israel and Hamas, and we'll synthesize as many of those questions as we can. And I definitely want to talk about hunger issues, as the March for the Food Bank is a mere 11 days away, where you and I and the executive director of the food bank and a host of others will march 43 miles from Springfield to Greenfield over 2 days to raise money and awareness about issues surrounding hunger in our region. But any big surprises for you with this past election, specifically in Massachusetts Tuesday night?
Well, not really dramatic surprises in Massachusetts. I was pleasantly surprised at the national results.
Does it feel like your hometown of Worcester is purpling, if not reddening? And does that worry you as a dyed blue Democrat?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, our city council races and school committee races are supposed to be nonpartisan, but you know that there are some very partisan people who are running. There are some people that I'm not terribly crazy about, but I mean, one of the problems we have in Worcester, and it's not just unique to Worcester, is I think our local media is not as vibrant as it used to be, and it's difficult for people to know what people stand for. But we'll have to see. I never take anything for granted in my district, especially in my hometown, and I'm going to continue to fight for the things that I care about, which I think is what the majority of people in my district care about.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Worcester's Jim McGovern, the big topic this week from listeners is Israel and Hamas. And my neighbor in Great Falls, Ian, submitted a series of questions that I think really speak to the bevy of questions that we've got surrounding this. He wanted to say that he is an ethnically Jewish person who believes that the real anti-Semitism is the exploitation of Jewish plight to justify genocide. That's his words, not mine. And I know that you've signed on to some legislation to talk about anti-Semitism, to stand up against anti-Semitism. I think it's across the board. It should be worth noting that anti-Semitism has no place, but there are other issues beyond anti-Semitism that are worrying people, even ethnically Jewish people. One of the questions he says is, do you still support an immediate ceasefire in Gaza? And if so, what actions are you taking to put pressure on the administration? He adds, if not, how do you justify this stance when the Palestinian death toll stands at over 10,000, approximately 40% are children? Now, I know there is a House resolution, 786, that many legislators have signed on to. Last check, I did not see your name signed on to that. So talk about the difference between this ceasefire, that legislation, and where you stand.
No, I've called for a ceasefire a while ago. And the legislation that seems to be everyone's focused on is basically a sense of Congress resolution. It's a press release, essentially. So I mean, I think the focus ought to be on getting people to use their voices to call for a ceasefire and to pressure the administration to call for a ceasefire. And I've been in contact with the State Department, and I've been in contact with the National Security Council in this administration. And I've given my reason why I think there should be an immediate ceasefire. I think extending the fighting, I don't think in the long run gets us to a place that anybody, no matter what your views are on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I don't think it gets you to a place where things are better for anybody. But I've been very clear on my views for a ceasefire, and so there should be no misunderstanding about that or confusion about that. I mean, the Palestinians deserve to have their rights and recognition, and they deserve to have a future. Having said that, people who live in Israel have a right to live with the sense that their security is protected. I differentiate Hamas from the Palestinians in the sense that Hamas, in its charter, calls for the elimination of Israel. I mean, that's in its charter, in Hamas's charter. I mean, the Palestinians have adjusted their view on that, and that is, duly noted, but not Hamas. And again, when people say that Hamas represents the Palestinian people, I mean, I think that was that election like 17 years ago. I don't look at them as freedom fighters. I look at them with a very different agenda. That doesn't mean, and it doesn't lessen my commitment to a independent Palestinian state. And I think we need to, as we look to end this, we have to keep that front and center. But again, I mean, I mean, Hamas ought to release the hostages. I mean, hostage taking is a violation of international law, period.
Let me stop you right there, because one of the other questions that my neighbor Ian, who again said, is coming from an ethnically Jewish perspective, saying, do you believe that the release of prisoners by Israel should be part of this? There are hostages that are held in Israeli prisons, and are you asking and putting the pressure on the Israeli government in the same way that you're putting on Hamas to release prisoners in this way?
Well, I have no doubt that there are prisoners in Israeli jails that we could argue are political prisoners and are not there because they are committed violent acts or whatever. That is something that Israel needs to decide on its own. But I do think that people should not be put in jail for their political beliefs. But what Hamas did was actively cross over into a territory and kidnap people, elderly women, people who have severe health issues. Some of the people that were killed were leaders in the peace movement. They were murdered. I don't want to get into this thing where somebody say, oh, well, what Hamas did is somehow justified based on all the history. If that's the way we think about things, then to me, there's no hope. I mean, no, there's things that are wrong. We always say this is wrong. There's lots of stuff that Israel has done over the years that I think is wrong. We should say that. But it's not. It can't be this tit for tat thing, or this is terrible, but we're okay with it because of what happened. No, this is awful.
Let me stop you there again, too, because if what Israel's done in the past is wrong, is what Israel is doing now wrong? They're alleged to be bombing hospitals and schools and water treatment facilities as defense. Is that wrong? And if it's not wrong, why not sign on to that press release, House Resolution 786, to say, let's stop this now?
Everybody has an obligation to uphold international humanitarian law. If hospitals are being bombed, that's a violation of international humanitarian law. No, nobody has a right to go after civilians. No one has a right to bomb hospitals. And again, I'm puzzled by your obsession with a sense of Congress resolution as somehow being more important than a definitive statement.
I just don't know. I don't understand what the harm would be in signing on to it. What is it? What keeps you from signing on to it?
The harm is that there are a lot of other things in that resolution that, quite frankly, I want to use my own words in describing what I think ought to happen here, and not somebody else's words. And there's a reason why there's only 17 people on that resolution. It's because everybody feels that they want to be able to say for themselves what they believe. And the idea that somehow calling for a ceasefire isn't good enough, but people need to be forced to go on to something that maybe they would have worded a little bit differently, I think that's ridiculous. If that's where the fights are going to be, have at it. But the bottom line is I have been very clear that I believe that we ought to have a ceasefire. We have a ceasefire now. And if not a ceasefire, at least a cessation in hostilities to get humanitarian aid to people that desperately need it right now in Gaza. And maybe find a way to get some of these hostages released. And many of them who just are not political at all. That's the other thing. These are just people that just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Some of those people are the family that we've all heard quite a bit about, that we've been following through these conversations weekly, Congressman McGovern. The Medway family that fled Gaza is home, and your office worked hard with the State Department to try to get them released from Gaza. Have you had the opportunity to speak with that family now that they're back stateside?
I haven't. I've talked to them. I'm giving it a little time. I've been in touch with friends of their family and their attorney. We're going to give them a little time to get adjusted. But I'm really grateful and relieved that they are home. It took longer than I think it should have, but the good news is that they are safe.
In the few minutes we have left, I want to talk about issues surrounding hunger because 11 days from now, Congressman McGovern and myself and the executive director of the Food Bank of Western Mass and a bunch of other well-intentioned and loving people from our area are going to do a crazy thing and walk 43 miles over 2 days from Springfield to Greenfield to talk about and learn about how hunger affects our region. And we'll be having these conversations on this show in the lead up to the march, which is November 20th and 21st. It's not too late to get involved. You can either start a team, support a team. You can find out more at foodbankwma.org. But just this week, there has been an update to the way that we address hunger issues from the federal level with an update to the Thrifty Food Plan. Can you tell us what the Thrifty Food Plan is, the TFP, and what this update will mean in combating hunger from a federal level?
Well, what it does is it forces us to analyze whether or not the benefit that we're providing people and the benefit that we get from SNAP, whether or not it's adequate to meet the needs given all the costs, given inflation, given all the other factors. And for years, it was done in a way where nothing changed. The benefit was stagnant for years and years and years. And then when this got put into place, we were able to increase the purchasing power of SNAP, which is a good thing. It means that people don't have to rely as much on food banks and food pantries to put food on the table.
We learned from Andrew Morehouse that for every meal the food bank provides, SNAP provides 9 meals. So this really is an important piece of the puzzle.
The problem we're faced with right now in this current Congress is that we have Republicans that are trying to basically repeal the Thrifty Food Plan update, which basically will mean that it will be almost impossible to give people an increase in their benefits, which I think would be a cruel and awful thing to do.
Talk about how much that increase is, though, or how little, I should say.
Well, it was increased from $1.40 per person per meal to $1.60, and that was it, right? In the scheme of things, you or I would think it's kind of minuscule, but it adds up, and it has helped families, and especially since a lot of the pandemic upticks in nutrition programs have basically expired. This has kept people from going way under. And, we say this all the time when we do that crazy thing of walking 43 miles. But, we live in the richest country in the history of the world, for God's sake. And we've got tens of millions of people who are hungry. And the people who are hungry defy stereotype. These are not just people who are unhoused, who don't have jobs. These are people who are working. These are people with families, with kids. These are senior citizens who have dedicated their whole life to improving our communities. And it is a moral outrage. The idea that here we are again dealing with people who are trying to turn the clock back and make it even more difficult for people to put food on the table, I think is a scandal. I really do. And we do this march to help supplement assistance that goes to people because, quite frankly, the government is not doing enough. And there are some things you can live without, but food is not one of them. And I'm really proud of Massachusetts and our state legislative delegation and the governor for making school meals universal for everybody. I think that's really important. We need to make sure the funding is there so that the nutrition content of those meals are where we want them. But there's still a lot of other people who, will not benefit from that, and we need to address the realities. This is a moral question. It's a human rights question here at home. And it is not acceptable. It is not acceptable, no matter how people want to spin it, for anybody to go hungry. And when I heard this in the Rules Committee the other day, people just ought to get a job. There's plenty of work out there. Yeah, there's a lot of work out there, and people are taking those jobs. And those people are not earning enough to be able to meet all their expenses, including putting food on the table for them and their families. We ought to figure out a way to get this right. And until we do, Monty's March is a necessity. And I think if Andrew Morehouse from the Food Bank were on this call, he would tell you how much of a help the funds raised over 2 days on this 43-mile brutal walk, how much it means to people in our community. And to anybody who's listening here today, is on the 20th and 21st, tune in, pay attention, step up to the plate. Every little bit adds up. No contribution is too small and no contribution is too big. But we just, this is about people in our community. By the way, many people who we see each and every day, and we have no idea how difficult their lives are. So this is important.
U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, who will be part of the March for the Food Bank, along with many of the legislators that he was referencing earlier, and many community members, maybe even you, November 20th and 21st. You can find out all the details on the March for the Food Bank by going to foodbankwma.org or by visiting our website, NEPM.org. We'll talk one more time before the march, and I think we'll really dial it in about hunger next week, Congressman McGovern, to give people an idea of the work that you've been doing on the federal level, to hear the feedback that you've been getting in your decades of trying to end hunger in this country, and hope to inspire them to help end hunger locally here. Thanks as always, Congressman.
All the best. Be safe.
Soon we'll hear exactly what it takes to hollow out a pumpkin enough so that you could use it as a flotation device with Dave Rothstein.
And we'll hear about the Indigenous Film Festival happening in the North Berkshires this weekend.
But next, NEPM's Karen Brown speaks with us about the gambling landscape in the Bay State.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. Massachusetts casino law was groundbreaking for the money earmarked to address harms of gambling. But 5 years since the state's first major casino opened, few are getting treated for addiction, and experts are questioning where the money is being spent.
NEPM's Karen Brown is 2/3 of the way through a 3-part series featured here on 88.5 and at NEPM.org addressing these concerns. Karen Brown joins us in the studio now. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's start out with a clip that didn't get into the series as we've heard it so far from Mark Vanderlinden. Who's Mark Vanderlinden?
Well, he is one of the regulators on the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. So that's the body that is supposed to license casinos, and it's also in charge of mitigating the harms of gambling. And he is the head of the office that is specifically, I think it's called responsible gambling.
Let's play that clip.
Changing behavior is really hard. And so our challenge is to say, how do we provide people with information in a way that's digestible so that at the very least, we're getting them to think about their gambling behavior if they choose to gamble.
And it's interesting in the story that you put forward over the last 2 days on the air about the specific ways and programs that the state has created and the amount of money that's been put towards that. The first part of it the first segment has a lot to do with responsible gambling and about changing behavior. Can you tell us about Game Sense?
Sure. So Game Sense is part of is one way that the state is sort of enacting their mandate. So when this law passed, part of the law, and this was considered groundbreaking, was that the casinos had to contribute to a fund of money to help mitigate the harms of gambling. And that makes sense, but most states don't do that. So there's currently like $24 million in a public health trust fund that is dedicated specifically to mitigating the harms. Now, what does that mean? That means different things to different people.
Right.
So a small portion of that, about a quarter of that, goes to a program, well, a little bit less than a quarter of that, to a program that is supposed to promote responsible gambling. So some people consider that impossible, right? Some people think you shouldn't gamble at all. But the commission is in charge of regulating gambling, and they're saying people are going to gamble. We want them to gamble as responsibly as possible. We don't want them to spend more money than they have. We want them to understand how the odds work. We want them to understand that the chance of hitting the jackpot is very slim. So they created, or they actually licensed a program that started in Canada called Game Sense, and they have people go through the casinos. They're called Game Sense advisors. They're kind of looking for people that might be in trouble. They're trying to make friends, but also they're trying to offer tips on gambling literacy. And the idea, it's not clear how well it works, but the idea is that the more people that engage with this Game Sense program, the more they'll figure out how to stay recreational gamblers and not problem gamblers.
It kind of reminds me of a C3 policing program, but for gambling, the way that it works.
You mean in terms of like community
They're
involvement?
They're
Yeah,
walking the
they're
floor
walking
and
the
keeping an
floor
eye out
and
to make
keeping
sure
an eye
nobody's
out.
in trouble. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. The other way is looking at it as harm reduction. So it's not that you can't stop people from gambling. You're not going to. That wouldn't make any sense because we've just legalized casinos and the state wants to make money from that, of course. But the idea is let's reduce the chances that you'll become addicted to gambling or a problem gambler.
Another thing that your story brought up that I thought was really interesting is that there's a voluntary self-exclusion list.
Yes.
And is this through the state that you can sign up and basically keep yourself kicked out of casinos?
Yeah, you ban yourself. It's basically you've come to a point, and GameSense is part of this. Like the GameSense advisors help you sign up for this if they feel like if people feel like this is what they have to do. But you can sign up for a year, for 5 years, or for a lifetime.
Wow.
And one thing I thought was interesting is you're not allowed to sign up for a lifetime ban immediately. Like the casinos or the regulators say you have to try it out first, make sure that you really want to ban yourself, and then you're allowed to ban yourself for your whole life. I thought that was a little strange.
Can you
myself.
unban yourself if you decided at one point to ban yourself? Or are you
No.
really
You
for
can-
life for life?
If it's 1 year, you can unban yourself after a year.
Uh-huh.
But after, if that's the whole idea. If you ban yourself for a lifetime, that's it. At least in Massachusetts,
That's
there
what
are
I was going to
there are
ask.
ways to get around it.
Like it only applies for casinos in Massachusetts, not necessarily for any of the larger groups that have casinos in other places. Where
That's right. And some people ban themselves and still go in. They can't quite do it, and they often get in trouble. And sometimes security has to escort them out, and that's and that must be very frustrating, I would think.
We're speaking with NEPM's Karen Brown, who's 2/3 of the way through a 3-part series. Part 3 will air tomorrow about Massachusetts gambling, about gambling addiction, about the landmark amount of money and resources being put towards gambling addiction in the Commonwealth, but where some of that money is part of the question. Marlene Warner is the head of the Mass Council on Gaming and Health, who has questions whether the state has the right treatment services.
My board is really concerned as well. So they're, trying to figure out ways to just gather more information, figure out as advocacy organization, do we have the right resources in Massachusetts, and is the money being spent where it should be?
One of the things that you did that I thought was fascinating with this piece is that you called the gambling helpline yourself.
Right.
And tried to get help, and you did not come across great results.
Well, I mean, the person who answered was very friendly and empathetic, but they gave a lot of information about where the resources are that was not correct. So there's a lot of outdated information that the state is putting out, and the problem is there's not a lot of gambling treatment available. And that I don't think is clear to a lot of people. And this is a nationwide problem. This is not just in Massachusetts. It's historically people who have problems gambling don't seek out treatment very often. It's called a hidden addiction. There's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of stigma. But we in Massachusetts have so much money, and that is specifically what we're supposed to be doing is providing treatment. So there are a lot of questions. Do we have the right resources? Is there promotion to, is there outreach so that people who might have problems but don't recognize it, are they finding that out? Is there enough training of people that for therapists in specific gambling addiction treatment? And it's not that clear who is overseeing whether all of these services are available.
What's interesting that your piece brought up as well is that there's $24 million that comes from the casinos to address these public health issues with gambling. We know where about a quarter of it is going towards, but nobody really knows where the rest of this money is right now?
Well, we know where it is. It's in the Department of Public Health, and
Right.
there is an Office of Problem Gambling. And I did speak to the head of that. His name is Victor Ortiz, and I was very appreciative that he was willing to talk with me. But I asked, where is all of this money going? Because there's even a dispute how much money is in this total pool. The Gaming Commission told me $24 million. The Department of Public Health said it was actually less than that. It's hard to get the numbers, which I think is odd. You would think this is public information.
And you do have a public records request in for it, right?
Well, I have a public records request for where is the 3/4 that the Department of Public Health is supposed to be spending.
Right.
So they have a lot of documents, but they don't have specifically which programs are being funded. They couldn't tell me exactly. They sort of gave me a lot of vague information. I said, I want to know specifically who is getting your money and for what purpose and when and who's being helped. And that's where they said, you're going to have to give us a public records request because we're just not going to hand that information over to you. And I thought that was interesting.
Certainly is. Karen Brown, part 3 will air tomorrow morning and then will be available on NEPM.org. Want to give us a teaser about what tomorrow's segment will be all about?
That's going to be mostly about the research into problem gambling, which is another area in which Massachusetts is considered a real groundbreaker. That a portion of this money I was just telling you about, the $24 million, a portion of it goes specifically to look into how many people have gambling addiction problems, how many people are aware of treatment, how many, what comes first, the gambling problems or the money problems. And all of this is, again, funneled through the Gaming Commission, which is an unusual thing in this country.
That is strange.
But the money for that has been shrinking also, which is sort of interesting. So that's a little bit of what I talk about tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning on NEPM's version of Morning Edition, and then it will be on NEPM.org, the NEPM News Department's Karen Brown. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
On the way, down the Connecticut River we go in a pumpkin scooped for one with Dave Rothstein.
But up next, we'll hear how the Stockbridge-Munsee community, Williams College, and Images Cinema in Williamstown are coming together to present the Indigenous Film Festival this weekend.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM.
Time enough for counting when the dealing's done.
Rumor has it that Weird Al Yankovic is a frequent person in Williamstown. Have you seen Weird Al Yankovic at Images Cinema?
I have not, but one thing that was actually really cool that happened because Weird Al Yankovic's daughter is a student at Williams College, is why Weird Al has been seen in and around Williamstown. We've got to be one of like 5 theaters in the country or something like that got to do a screening of Weird the Al Yankovic.
That movie's so good.
It is so good. I'm also going to shamelessly plug that Weird Al Yankovic's UHF is going to be screening at another cinema in Turner's on Saturday night, but you should definitely go to all the Indigenous People Film Festival films too.
That is the tough choice, but if you can make that a double bill somehow,
Right.
that's incredible.
November is Indigenous Peoples Month, and this Friday is the opening reception of the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival at Images Cinema in Williamstown.
Presented on the traditional territories of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, this festival is produced by Images Cinema in collaboration with SMC Cultural Affairs and the students of History 276, a class at Williams College.
Yeah, that's correct. It was taught spring semester of the previous school year.
Awesome.
And Friday at 6:30 at the Images Cinema in Williamstown, right around the corner from Williams College, is the opening night reception of the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival, catered by Indigenous Deliciousness. So we want to know all about all of these things: History 276, Indigenous Deliciousness, and of course the films. And joining us is the executive director of Images Cinema Williamstown, Dan Hudson. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So is this a frequent collaboration between, let's say, a history class at Williams College and the historic cinema that's right down the street?
Or frankly, any of the classes at Williams College.
You know, one of the things that was really cool when I first arrived at Images Cinema was learning about a lot of these sort of connective issues and collaborations, some of which are a little bit more sporadic and organic, but then we've also had, on the film festival side, some longstanding collaborations with some faculty. We have a French film festival, which historically happens in February, and a German-Austrian film festival, which historically happens in October. There's definitely precedent, but not always including an additional third-party collaborator, which we had for this festival with the Stockbridge-Munsee.
Tell us about that relationship with the Stockbridge-Munsee.
You know, one of the things that I noticed when I first started my tenure here about a little over a year ago, I saw that the Stockbridge-Munsee had an office there on Spring Street, just a few doors down for us. And I reached out to Bonnie Hartley, who works in that office, who connected me with Monique Tyndall, who's based in Wisconsin, where the reservation for the Stockbridge-Munsee is. And just kind of was like, hey, we're here, very open to ideas that you might have, different things that we could do together. So that kind of planted the seed, which gained momentum with when the students of History 276, who worked with Bonnie Hartley and Monique Tyndall and others in the Stockbridge-Munsee, to think about different ways to increase visibility and kind of cultural activity that can be done here in the Berkshires. And we raised our hand as a very eager collaborator.
We're speaking with Dan Hudson, who's the executive director of Images Cinema in Williamstown, who is presenting the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival. The opening night reception is this Friday.
Can we talk about some of the selection that you've got? Because I think that this is really curated well. How did you go about it?
You know, one thing for us as we were approaching this, both from Images Cinema and also from the students at Williams College, we wanted to try to find a way to center the Stockbridge-Munsee and kind of their more specific tribal experience. And one of the things that was a little challenging is that there is not so much representation of the Mohican peoples specifically in film, but there were a couple entry points to that. One of which is that Sheila Tausey is an enrolled tribal member of the Stockbridge-Munsee. She was in a lot of film and television in the 90s and 2000s. And so we're featuring Thunderheart, which is her feature film debut, as a tribute to her. And it's also kind of interesting because it's kind of an opportunity to look back at Native representation in film from about 30 years ago and kind of contrast that with films that are made today.
There's been a homicide on Indian land.
They sent him to a foreign land.
What's my cover?
In the middle of America.
You're going in there as who you are, an American Indian federal officer.
To uncover the truth.
Federal officer, hands on your head. Do it!
What's your name?
Sure as hell ain't Geronimo, Chief. I think maybe you guys got off the wrong exit, yeah? You looking for Mount Rushmore?
Thunderheart was written and directed by non-native people, and the majority of the films that we have in the lineup are written and directed by Native and Indigenous peoples. And that's one of the things that's really exciting, that just in 30 years, we kind of have that evolution in representation, both in front of and behind the camera.
And Thunderheart will be part of this film festival on Saturday evening at 7:30. It's a 1992 film that stars, in addition to Sheila Tausey, who you mentioned, Graham Greene, who is an Indigenous actor, and Val Kilmer and Sam Shepard. What are some of the other films that we can see at the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival, which kicks off this Friday in Williamstown?
Our opening night and closing night features are both films that are on the festival circuit right now. So Images Cinema through this festival is hosting these films before they're available to stream, buy on DVD or anything like that. So this is, a premiere opportunity to check out these works. Our opening night film, Fry Red Face and Me, was at South by Southwest and Toronto International Film Festival and some others. It's a coming-of-age film exploring youth grappling with different sexual orientations, gender identities, and that sort of thing in Navajo reservation area.
Why do you play with dolls? You speak English? I got in trouble playing with dolls one time. They were Hopi Kachina dolls, and I made them kiss. What's your clan? Salt? Are you sure? Yeah, salt. Well, don't just say salt. Say salt. I am a salt clan. Say Ashihe. I am Ashihe.
And our closing night film features Lily Gladstone, who's just in the Killers of the Flower Moon. She's kind of really a high-profile actress.
She's going to probably win an Oscar. I've not sat down for the 3.5 hours of this film yet, but I can't wait to. But everybody says she's dynamite. And if you've watched Reservation Dogs, she's one of the aunties in that, and she's dynamite in that as well. So this is a big star on the rise here.
Yeah, absolutely. I shout out to Lily Gladstone. I was fortunate to kind of bump shoulders with her in the Seattle film scene. Everybody should check out Three Women if they want to see some early Lily Gladstone.
But this film on Sunday night, it's Fancy Dance. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So Fancy Dance, another interesting sort of entry point, another Reservation Dogs connection. Erica Tremblay was writer-director of the film. She directed a bunch of episodes of Reservation Dogs and was a writer on that show as well. The story delves into one of the ongoing crises in North America, which is the missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis. But it's also a very beautiful human film that centers on the relationship between Lily Gladstone and her sister, who is trying to get to this titular fancy dance.
Well, what's your move? Far as I can tell, I'm the only one out there looking.
You always do this. You take something that's happened to everybody and you make it about yourself. If you keep going on like this, it don't end well for you.
A little darker, but it's kind of an interesting counterpoint to kind of the levity and sweetness of the opening night film.
And that's how the festival will close on Sunday. We're speaking with Dan Hudson, the executive director of Images Cinema Williamstown, who'll be presenting the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival starting this Friday evening.
I think it's a really interesting curation decision to put short films, mostly documentary short films, ahead of each of these feature films. That format allows you to pack a lot of information about a often ignored subject, the subject of Indigenous people, to folks before they have a little bit of fiction in the same area. Whose decision was it to pair these together?
Yeah, that was actually came from Monique Tyndall at the Stockbridge-Munsee Cultural Affairs office. Some of the short films that are going to be playing before these films are actually directly telling histories and stories from Stockbridge-Munsee.
You can also learn about the Lakota people as well. Another documentary that seems to be garnering a lot of buzz that will be screened on Sunday afternoon is Lakota Nation versus United States.
Yeah, so this is a film that we're excited to bring. It did come out in theaters a couple months ago, and it was a film that was requested that we screen, and we said, we're going to get to it. We got a really great spot for it. Yeah, this film I think is going to be interesting. It kind of uses what has been in the news a lot lately, the Standing Rock protests around the Dakota Access Pipeline, kind of as a jumping off point to talk about protests and activism and resistance across hundreds of years of U.S. history.
When they illegally took the land from our people, it wasn't just the land itself that was taken. It was part of a process to colonize us.
Have the Williams students in this particular class, History 276, influenced the films that have come in or how this festival has been held? What involvement have they had?
Yeah, so they were very involved in the sort of initial ideation around both including the films like the Sheila Tausey tribute and those short films which feature histories about the Stockbridge-Munsee. The one feature film that we haven't talked about yet in the lineup, Beans, is actually a film that was specifically requested by the students. It's a story of the Mohawk peoples in Quebec, Canada, and the Okia crisis that happened in the 90s.
My name is Digahandekwa, or you can call me Beans. Everybody does.
The occupation of an ancient pine forest on the Mohawk Reserve of Ganazadage is in its 4th month. The people here are protecting a burial ground from being leveled for a golf course expansion by the neighboring town of Oka.
What's happening?
We're speaking with Dan Hudson, the executive director of Images Cinema, who this weekend will host the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival. And the opening night reception on Friday is going to have catering by Indigenous Deliciousness.
Which sounds awesome.
It does sound awesome. Tell us a little bit about what Indigenous Deliciousness is, other than just something fun to say.
We're really excited that we found an Indigenous caterer that works here in the Berkshires. So hopefully everybody has something tasty and can invest in a local woman of color owned and run business and hires them for other events as well. The menu, as far as I understand it, won't feature anything that is specifically a Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican traditional dish, but there will be flavors and cuisines represented from throughout the sort of North American Indigenous experience. And one other thing I will have to plug is that one of the greatest snacks of all time that is indigenous in North America, popcorn, will also be popping at the theater all weekend long.
The indigenous food that's at almost every movie in every movie theater.
Images Theater has also just turned 25.
Is it 25 or is it older?
Is it older?
The distinction there is that Images Cinema as a movie theater has been operating as a movie theater since 1916. Right now, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary as a 501c3 nonprofit. We wouldn't still be here 25 years on from that sort of nonprofit designation without that designation. And speaking of which, we do want to acknowledge again Williams College for underwriting the festival, which makes it completely free to the community.
Dan Hudson is the executive director of Images Cinema, who is somehow celebrating both its 25th anniversary and its over 100th anniversary at the same time.
107th.
You're so much faster at math than I am. And we'll celebrate the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival starting this Friday evening and going through Sunday evening in Williamstown. You can find out the complete list of those films at imagescinema.org. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Monty and Khalees. This was great. I'm really looking forward to people checking this festival out.
It is time to hear how far a gourd can really take you and your oars with Dave Rothstein, who is paddling down the Connecticut in a pumpkin, a real giant pumpkin.
That's up next. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. That's Smashing Pumpkins. No matter where you are, I can still hear you when you drown. You've traveled very far. Just to see you, I'll come around.
See if I'll come around. All of our yesterdays.
Perfect. And I couldn't help but think about that particular song as my friend Dave Rothstein, a farmer from Florence, was paddling a pumpkin down the Connecticut River. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Clee Smith. I don't think we ever got as many pitches for stories as we did about this.
Everybody was like, do you guys know what is happening right now? And this is the most perfect Fabulous 413 story ever. If you missed it somehow, this is the headline from the Greenfield Recorder, and I loved it. Gourd big or gourd home? But our friend Scotty had a hot take on this that had some swears involved with it, but maybe you can distill it.
So I feel like I should preface this with the fact that Scotty is African American, but it was basically white people be out there living in gingerbread houses and drifting downstream in pumpkins and stuff.
It is a magical story where you carved out a 1,024-pound pumpkin, which was placed second at the Big E's heaviest pumpkin contest, and then paddled it down the Connecticut River. Tell us why, Dave.
Well, first, thanks for having me.
No problem. I mean, again, as we have mentioned in several parts of this, like, you are living your best fairy tale life, and I think that should just be shared.
Yeah.
And I think that's really just the point, is that we should be living life to the fullest. Why did I do it?
Yeah.
There's a serious side to this, and there's a funny side.
Let's start with the funny side.
Funny side.
Right.
Because when I was a kid, you could check out the Guinness Book of World Record when you're at the library at school, and you'd leaf through and be like, "Oh my God, well,
have you seen these longest fingernails?" I would always be like, "Look at the
exactly right. They're all twisted."
Yeah.
And now you go on and there's like a record for everything.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was up in Goffstown, New Hampshire, maybe about a decade ago, they had a giant pumpkin regatta. And so they had like 10 giant pumpkins all there, and the town came out, and every group decorated their pumpkin, and people were in costumes, and they did like the 100-yard dash, and it took like 5 minutes for the pumpkins to get across the 100 yards. And I was like, that looks like fun. I want to do that. And then, but where do you get a giant pumpkin, and how do you get it to the river?
Right.
And so I shelved that
Fairy
for a
godmother?
while.
No, that was not.
It could be. Yeah. I liken this thing to, this is a combination of lots of different dreams and influences, but there's kind of like James and the Giant Peach, right? Yes. Everything's a little oversized.
Amazing, yeah.
Yep. Coupled with, it's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, because it would not be beyond me to go sit outside and wait for a giant pumpkin on a cool autumn night.
Absolutely.
Mixed with Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas.
You are speaking my language.
Because it was the river. Remember Emmett Otter?
The River Bottom Nightmare Band.
Yeah, and the mother otter rode so slowly and laboriously, and I was just like, "That's exactly what I'm living right now, going down the river." I'm with Emmett and his mom, and we're in a pumpkin. We're followed by eagles.
Oh, man.
And so all of it for me comes back to, this isn't a record about me. This is a record for the people of the valley. Like, this is a magical place, and this was about community, about bringing people together, about bringing joy to people at a time where we've got a lot of divisiveness. And it's a silly go down a river in a pumpkin, and there was tons of logistics that I hadn't thought about, that I would now probably do things a little bit differently. But it was a teamwork exercise, right? From people who were paddling with me, to the farmer who grew the pumpkin, to the people who transported the pumpkin and hollowing it out and weighing it. And it was just, the Connecticut River is incredibly special. Like, this is a place that is filled with stories, and it's timeless. Like, we ended at Dinosaur Footprints Reservation and State Park for a reason, because, this river will outlast us, and it was here long before us. And so it's timeless, and we need to treat it with respect. And it was just an opportunity to say, hey, gather up some friends, come on out to the river at a time you wouldn't normally do it, and see something a little wacky that you're not going to forget, and then maybe discover at that time that there are lots of recreational opportunities, and there are things we can do to improve the river health.
And you turned it into a fundraiser for 3 organizations that help with the environment in our area: CISA, who we have on very frequently on this show, the Connecticut River Conservancy, as well as Kestrel Land Trust.
What are some of those logistical things that you ran into that you didn't consider when you initially thought about putting a pumpkin in the river and riding it?
Will it float?
Ah.
That's a big one.
Yes.
No, but it's just even like acquiring the pumpkin. So I've grown giant pumpkins for the last 5 years or so, but I can never get them big enough to actually get inside of. And this year, my plan was, I'm going to do it this year. We're going to do it. And partly because this year, there were 3 attempts at the record.
The record was?
The record was just a little over 38 miles. And that was done on like a big free-flowing river, like out on the Missouri River.
Right.
So they had some speed behind them, and they didn't have to worry about dams the way that we do here.
Yes.
Right.
And I was like, if it starts getting up any higher, I'm not going to have a chance to do it on the Connecticut because we don't have a stretch without a big portage, and you can't get a 1,000-foot pumpkin out of there.
Right.
So, so just getting the pumpkin. So mine died, and I ended up meeting up with Peter Thayer, who grew the pumpkin over at the Big E, who came in second from a seed named Maverick. That's the lineage.
So is the pumpkin's name Maverick?
Well, the pumpkin isn't named. This is a really important thing. Like in the pumpkin world, it's kind of like the Westminster Dog Show,
yes.
right? Like there's a whole pumpkin subculture, and it's fascinating, right? And people are really, like, people inject them with hormones, and they have heated blankets.
Oh my gosh, we are going so deep down this rabbit hole.
This is amazing.
Right. Tomorrow on the 413.
Yeah, we're going to talk all about Maverick and its children.
Pumpkin hormones.
So it took me like weeks to get Peter's number because it was like hidden away. And so I finally called him, and I'm like, dude, I got a crazy idea. And he was on board. I wasn't expecting him to say yes because this is like his prize thing.
Yeah.
And but he was on board, and so then it's already like a month old, so it's starting to like decompose.
Yeah.
So that's already the first logistical problem. Is like, do you want to be floating in a pumpkin that's on its way out? But it turned to be out pretty stable. And then it was getting it from his place. He had brought it to his workplace in Springfield. He works for Springfield Water Supply.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a little consternation on part of their staff, understandably so, because they became very attached to going and seeing Maverick every day.
Yeah.
And when they heard that Maverick was going to go on a journey, and it turns out that a number of their staff members showed up on the course.
Oh, that's great.
That's great.
But they weren't there to see me break a record. They were there to see Maverick.
And to curse your name for cutting Maverick open.
It was a team exercise. And so one person was sitting, it was the Greenfield River, or the Deerfield River coming around Greenfield, that very still section by the railroad yard. And there was this person all dressed in black, and she was sitting there between these trees way up on the bank. And I said to the paddlers who were with me, Bill and Amelia, I said, shh, there's someone who's just being very contemplative over there. And she yelled, I know that pumpkin. That's Pete's pumpkin.
We're speaking with Dave Rothstein, who, if you've been following social media over the last week, you have no doubt seen a picture of a person paddling a pumpkin down the Connecticut River, trying to break the Guinness Book of World Records record. In just the few minutes that we have left, I know Guinness is very particular in how records are broken. So did you officially break the pumpkin paddling record, or was this an aspirational, you broke the record for you? Or for all of us,
yes.
Really?
The record is broken for all of us. For Guinness, there's so many pieces of evidence that they review. It takes like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
But I don't know, so someone else broke it this year and did like 39 miles.
Yeah.
And we did 40. So it's possible when their GPS unit comes in, maybe they did 41. So we'll have to see what Guinness says. But it's the feat, and it's the drawing the attention to the river. And I'll say, coincidentally, you had a guest on earlier, Representative McGovern.
Yes.
He and Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire introduced, at the same time the pumpkin was going in the water, they introduced the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership Act.
That's
which,
right.
if it's actually passed, will bring millions of dollars to the Connecticut River for protection, for restoration, and for recreational opportunities. And so there's a lot of happenstance in this story. But for me, the most fulfilling is the sense of community that was built around, in terms of the people who helped, the people who showed up, the people who were inspired to get to the river, and it's the perfect metaphor for the river. Like, we need to show up for the river.
That is Dave Rothstein, who didn't just show up for the river. He showed up for the river in a giant pumpkin and paddled it to break the world record. Thank you so much. This is the most fabulous 413 story of all time so far.
But now I feel like we need our own pumpkin regatta.
Yeah, I want to help you put on a pumpkin regatta.
Well, you don't have to ask me, because the Connecticut River Conservancy is thinking about doing it next year.
We're tight with them, so that should be great. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tomorrow on the show, we're going to have the Amherst Survival Center on. We're going to have Stone Soup Cafe on. We're going to have live music Friday, and we're going to drink wine.
That's true. All of that. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.